picture this.
Yeah.
You're finally settling in for a movie, lights are going down, the excitement is building, and then out of nowhere, chaos erupts. And unfortunately, this isn't some hypothetical scenario. This has been the unsettling reality for South Indian film fans in Canada for almost a decade.
And we're not just talking about a few isolated incidents here. This goes way beyond that.
Right, it feels much bigger.
These attacks, they strike at the heart of a really vibrant community. For this community, South Indian films are more than just entertainment. They're a vital part of their cultural identity, a touchstone. And to have that disrupted, it's unsettling, to say the least.
You're right. We're talking about a massive fan base, these huge blockbuster films with major stars. This is not some small niche market being targeted.
Exactly.
So to really understand what's going on here, I think we need to rewind a bit, go back to where it all seems to begin, which is around 2015. What was happening then?
Well, 2015 is when we saw the first really notable attack, and it coincided with the release of the Vijay film, Puli. Now, there were disruptions during screenings, but at the time, it seems like maybe an isolated incident, potentially just some disgruntled viewers, something random.
Something easy to dismiss.
Right.
Like, okay, that's strange, but we're going to move on.
Yeah.
But then things escalate.
Yes. So then we fast forward to 2016, and another Vijay film, Fairy, is released, and this is when the situation dramatically escalates.
Okay.
Now we're talking about pepper spray being released in theaters, screens being slashed.
Oh, wow.
This is no longer random acts. There's clear intent here to disrupt, to intimidate.
Yeah, that's really unsettling to think about, honestly. And this is where Cineplex, which for those who don't know is Canada's largest theater chain,
Right.
they make a pretty major decision that sends ripples through the industry.
Yeah, they decided to pull all South Indian films from their screens. They cited concerns about cathode ray tube concerns, what's known as CRT.
CRT, okay.
Now, this might sound like a very technical term, but basically it boils down to worries about potential damage to their projection equipment. However, the real impact of this decision was enormous.
Huge. It's essentially silenced an entire genre of films.
Exactly. And not just a few screenings here and there. This was a near-total shutdown of South Indian films in major Canadian theaters. And naturally, for a community that deeply values these films, it fueled feelings of being targeted, of being marginalized.
Right, like they are being specifically excluded.
Yes, and this decision, as you can imagine, created a sort of void in the market, and that's where a new player enters the scene, Woodside Cinemas.
Okay.
They swooped in, seemingly unafraid, and they became the place for South Indian film fans to go during this really uncertain time.
So they're like, we're going to show these films.
Right. While these other major chains are hesitant, they embrace them.
Interesting. And for a while, it seems like they're immune to all the attacks that have been plaguing these other screenings.
Yeah, they seem to be immune. And at this point, you almost have these two different storylines developing at the same time. You've got Woodside over here, seemingly providing a safe haven for fans, really becoming synonymous with South Indian cinema in Canada. But then there's this lingering question, this unease about whether they were truly just lucky.
Right, because why were they immune?
Exactly.
Right, because it's kind of suspicious how they managed to avoid all these incidents.
And that's where you start to hear these theories. Did they actually benefit from these attacks somehow? Maybe even playing a role in orchestrating them?
Okay, so basically taking out the competition, creating this problem so they could swoop in as the solution.
It's a classic tactic. And
Yeah.
think about it. You've got this competitor consistently drawing huge crowds, showing a specific type of film. Wouldn't that make them a target for someone wanting to control that market, to dominate it?
I mean, it makes sense in a kind of Machiavellian way, but
Yeah.
was there ever any actual evidence? Anything linking Woodside to these earlier attacks?
That was the big question, right? And for a while, the answer seemed to be no. No smoking gun. So Woodside continued to thrive. They became the go-to, really, for fans of South Indian cinema, the place to go.
Okay, but then things shift again, right? It's
Yeah.
like this story takes another turn.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, like something out of a movie plot itself. Woodside, the theater that seemed untouchable, they became the target.
Wait, really?
Yeah, in 2023, during a screening of that huge Regina Camp film, Jailer, at a Woodside theater, gunfire erupts.
Oh, wow.
And we're not talking about some random act of vandalism here. This is a whole other level of aggression, a direct threat to public safety.
Yeah, that changes everything. You're going from disruptions, property damage, to actual gunfire in a crowded theater. Were there any leads in this case? Any arrests?
Despite investigations, they never found the people responsible. And as if that wasn't unsettling enough, it happens again in 2024, this time during a screening of Mohanlal's film Malai Kotai Valaban.
And at another Woodside Cinema.
Another Woodside Cinema.
Okay, so twice now. Two high-profile attacks, both at Woodside theaters, both involving firearms. It seems way too targeted to be random.
It really does. It begs the question, was this just a continuation of those earlier attacks, but with a new level of intensity, a new motive?
Or is it someone else entirely? Because if Woodside was behind the initial attacks, as some people speculated, why target themselves? But then if they weren't involved before, why are they suddenly in the crosshairs?
Exactly. It's a head-scratcher. And this is where the idea of another player, a hidden player, really comes into play. Someone who benefits from all this chaos. Someone who might have flown under the radar amidst the initial confusion.
So, are we thinking maybe a rival studio trying to manipulate the market, get a foothold?
Possibly. Or maybe it's someone who sees the growing popularity of South Indian cinema in Canada as a threat, something they want to suppress.
It's almost like we need to zoom out, look at the bigger picture here.
Right, because this isn't just about damaged screens or a few scary incidents at the movies.
It feels much bigger.
This is about a community feeling targeted, unsafe, denied access to something they really value. And this is where that petition to the Canadian House of Commons comes in, right?
Right, because it's one thing to have rumors, to have theories, but for it to reach Parliament, that's a whole other level of concern. This petition, it's not just about getting to the bottom of these attacks, is it? It feels like it's a statement, a really powerful one.
It is. It's about a community that feels like their concerns haven't been heard, their safety compromised, and by taking it to the Canadian House of Commons, they're bringing attention to a much larger issue, which is that need for cultural representation and for security within that representation. It's like saying, this is our cinema, our culture, and we have a right to experience it without fear.
And it really highlights how important these films are to the South Asian community in Canada. It's more than just entertainment, right? It's about connecting with your heritage, your identity.
Exactly. And to have that disrupted, to have that threatened, attacked even, it creates a sense of vulnerability, of being marginalized. So this petition, it's also about reclaiming that space, demanding that recognition, and ensuring that everyone feels safe and welcome to enjoy cinema from all cultures.
So where do things stand now? I mean, with the investigation, are there any findings, any updates you can share?
As of right now, the investigation is still ongoing, and there are no concrete answers yet. There's a lot of speculation, of course, but no arrests has been made, and no one has been definitively linked to being behind all of this.
So it sounds like this case, it's a real tangled web with potentially huge consequences. I mean, where do you think this might all lead?
Well, I think this whole situation has exposed some really uncomfortable truths about the film industry, about cultural representation, and the lengths that some people will go to for power and control. And I think regardless of how it unfolds, this investigation has the potential to really reshape the landscape of film exhibition in Canada. It started this really important conversation, though, about diversity, about security, and who gets to tell their stories on screen.
It's amazing to me how we started by looking into what seemed like a string of targeted attacks, and we've uncovered this whole story that touches upon cultural identity, possible conspiracies. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is.
And I think it reminds us that even something as seemingly simple as going to the movies, it can be a lot more complicated than we think.
Absolutely. There are these deeper issues at play.
In this case, it really underscores just how important representation is, how important access is, and making sure that everyone feels safe and welcome to experience the power of cinema.